This is Ivor Davis, and you are listening to Jim and Mike Talk Music.
Today we have a special guest. He's worked for the London Daily Express, Times of London, and the New York Times. In 1964, he had the incredible assignment to follow the Beatles around on their first American tour. He's covered the Manson murders, and he was there when Robert Kennedy was assassinated. He's a regular Forrest Gump. Let's all welcome to Jim and Mike Talk Music, Mr. Ivor Davis. And the crowd goes wild.
They always do. They always do.
I love the crowd going wild. I just want to say that I should have had a box of chocolates. Because you mentioned Forrest Gump, and didn't he?
Oh, yeah.
What did he say about a box of chocolates?
Life is like a box of chocolates.
Yeah.
So
you never know what you're going to pick.
You never know what you're going to pick.
So we asked Joey Molin if he was a sir, but you claim you're a cur. That's what you told.
Yes.
Were you just messing with us? What is a cur?
I was slightly messing with you.
Slightly,
okay. Yeah. I hope I have a sense of humor, but I'm a cur, not a sir, because, the Queen, by the time the Queen, gives me a knighthood, she'll be 100. The Queen, I should explain for those of your listeners who don't know that the Queen of England kind of gets a sword, a rather dull-edged sword.
Yeah. Ceremonial.
On the shoulder. Mm-hmm. Ceremonial. She did it with that guy, the drummer from that English rock group from Liverpool. Damn. What was English rock group from Liverpool?
Ringo? The Beatles?
Yes, that's the one.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Oh, God.
I've heard of them.
I wondered. I forgot about that. Two of the Beatles, and Paul is Sir Paul McCartney,
Yes, yeah.
You better call him
sure.
Paul. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead. I'm a bit of a nuisance.
No. We want you to talk.
It's an honor to meet you. We can call you Ivor and not just Sir Davis.
Yeah.
Ivor,
okay.
Great.
But don't call me Shirley. Never call me Shirley.
Okay.
Remember that movie?
Yes, surely you must be joking.
So
yes, exactly.
Yes. So for our listeners, Jim's got a book holding up here.
Yes. It's The Beatles and Me on Tour. This is your wonderful book. And so in August 64, you had the opportunity to follow the Beatles around on their first American tour. Now, was this the first time you were in the United States?
No, the good thing was I was the West Coast correspondent for the London Daily Express.
Oh, okay.
Now, London Daily Express, in those days, do you guys remember, I'm going back a bit, when people actually read newspapers?
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, I had a paper route.
Yeah.
Oh, you did?
Those were the days.
There you go. Those were the days, my friend. Yeah. Anyway, so I was the correspondent, the West Coast Bureau, and the Beatles were coming to America, to San Francisco. And my editor called me and said, go and see the boys. The boys are arriving in San Francisco. And I said, who the hell are the boys? He said, the boys are the Beatles, seriously.
Yeah, and that was one of my
questions. That's what they called them, the boys.
That was one of my questions, calling them the boys. That just came naturally from the UK. I mean, who started calling the boys? It's kind of a natural, name, but
they were boys, though. They were pretty young.
Right.
Let me tell you who called them the boys. Brian Epstein. He said, they're my boys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it stuck.
It's kind of
that was it.
A familiar thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he did feel like they were his boys because, as the world knows, and you guys know, he snatched them out of the Cavern in Liverpool, this little nightclub, and then he turned them into what.
Yeah.
So when you got to the hotel in San Francisco, there was hundreds of girls surrounding the hotel.
Maybe thousands. I don't know. The big, when you say in your book, when you really realized it was huge and you could barely get into the hotel?
So
what happened was, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, if you were a girl or a woman reporter, you might not have gotten in. Yeah, because they thought you were a crazy fan.
Right, because so many of the fans, like you say,
I'm glad you brought that up because, go ahead.
But like you were saying in your book, so many of the fans were teenage girls, and they really were. There wasn't that many boys or young men in the crowd, right?
Not only were there not many young men in the crowd outside the hotel, but I want to tell you that in the stadiums for the next 5 weeks, I would say 90%, I never took account, 90% were girls. And as you know, and I don't want to jump ahead of the story, but I mean, the girls screamed from start to finish. Terrible. I never knew what they were singing about until I came on this show, and you're going to tell me.
So just like we see in the film clips, that it really is a mass of teenage girls screaming the whole time. Yeah. Now, we've been to a lot of rock concerts, and, most all of our listeners have at some point. And, the music is loud, but probably never to that degree of screaming that you can't even hear the music.
Let me tell you why, okay? The sound systems were crap back then.
Right.
So, I mean, they had it was primitive. It was terrible. So the screams overwhelmed the music. So much so, I kid you not, that I couldn't hear the music because I was sitting in the front row. The Beatles at times couldn't hear the music.
Yeah.
And very often, Ringo became a great lip reader because he didn't know what hell song they were singing. And then he'd look at John's lips, and then he realized he was playing A Hard Day's Night, and John was singing Help.
Right, and he could even to get the rhythm, he could maybe look at John's fingers, to see the rhythm moving. But that doesn't tell you what song it is. But at least to get that rhythm.
You knew who the Beatles were, though.
Well, I must confess, I'd heard of the Beatles, and before you guys were born, in February of 1964, they appeared on television. And they appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, and 74 million people tuned in that night, including me.
Okay.
And I saw the Beatles, I saw the screaming. I thought, if I can understand what they're singing about, they're pretty good. But really, communication back then was not as good as it is today. I always say, if I sneeze in Ventura, California, in New Jersey, 9 seconds later, you guys say, bless you, because it's been on the internet.
I think we've got we hate to interrupt you when you're talking. I think we've got about a 2-second delay from here to California with you. So I'm sorry if it sounds like we're interrupting. I think it's about 2 seconds is what I'm sensing here.
Well, then I'll make allowances for that. And I'll speak very slowly.
We're going to try to not talk over you, and you can talk over us.
So now, some wild stuff happened while you were on the tour. Like, girls sent themselves up in a cardboard box to the room one time. Are there any stories, I was wondering, that aren't in the book that you can tell us? Like any wild stories?
Or personal ones, well, relation to some of those fans.
I mean, look, can I ask you if, does your show, does it go out to people under the age of 16? Because I have a racy story to tell.
Oh, that's fine.
A racy story to tell, which is a terrific story. And so here we go.
I'm drooling.
Atlantic City. Stop. You're dribbling?
drooling. Yeah. Maybe it's dribbling in the UK. It's drooling. Yeah.
Might just wipe your mouth.
Yeah. There you go.
You would just wipe the drool. Okay, that's better.
I'm all ears.
Where was I? Okay. Atlantic City. The Beatles decide they're going to show us, the traveling press corps, A Hard Day's Night. Okay. So we're in a big penthouse banqueting room, and invited guests, and the Beatles are sitting there for the screening of A Hard Day's Night. So we come in, we sit down, there's all sandwiches, drinks, all on the Beatles, and if we were spongers, great spongers. I mean, if we could eat free and drink free,
take it all
at the Beatles' expense, we did it. We did it. So before the lights went down to watch A Hard Day's Night in this private screening, the door is flung open and the promoter walks in, the Atlantic City promoter walks in, and behind him there are 6 gorgeous young women in various states of dress and undress, skimpily clad. How about that?
Yeah.
So I jump up thinking, this is my lucky night. No. What happens is the promoter makes sure that we should all sit down, and he invites the Beatles to step forward. And he says to the Beatles, and I kid you not, take your pick. Well, so the Beatles are a bit stunned, but they're very quick thinkers.
Yeah.
So they make their selection in a flash.
Yeah.
Just like that.
You snooze.
And I kid you not, they grab the girl of their choice and they go off out of the room, presumably so that the girls can give them a tour of the boardwalk. I mean, that's what I think happened.
That's what they called it back then?
Yes.
We're going to start using that. Check out my boardwalk.
Yeah. I like it. Great.
That's
Yeah.
a good pickup line.
Then we sit down, we watch the movie. And when the lights come on again, the girls and the Beatles are in the back row. So the boardwalk trip was pretty quick.
Wow.
And I said to Paul, kind of stupidly, well, where did you go? And Paul said, we saw the movie last week.
Yeah.
Meaning we didn't have to stay.
And they were in it.
So, and they were in it, yes.
Yeah.
That was a wise choice for the boys. Yeah. To see a movie again or to go out with the girls. Yeah, it's a no-brainer.
On the boardwalk. Yeah, a no-brainer. Yeah, but I tell you a bit later. Here's what happened when Brian, who wasn't around at the time, heard about their trip to the boardwalk in plain view. He was very upset. Anyway, but that was kind of an interesting sidelight to my first screening of A Hard Day's Night with or without the Beatles.
And as you say in your book, Brian was a bit protective, and for our listeners to know, if listeners didn't read the book, not just protective, but looking out for the PR, always looking for what kind of image is going out to the public. Yeah, with the boys.
But don't forget, to interrupt you slightly, Brian cleaned up their image. Before they got the suits and the mop tops, they were leather jackets, they smoked, they swore, they were scruffs. And that's why they call them apple scruffs, I guess. And they were scruffy guys.
Yeah.
And then Brian at least took them to a tailor on Carnaby Street, which was the fashion street in London. He got the tailors to make them suits without pockets, so they couldn't put ciggies in their pockets.
Nice.
Quaaludes.
Or if they had, so that when they had a bulge in their pockets, it was not cigarettes.
So, Ivor, I think they would have still been successful, maybe not as successful as the Beatles, but they would have been still successful, but they would have been very different. They would have been more like the Ramones, like the Ramones have gotten popular. Leather jackets, cursing, working class. Yeah, that would have been, punk would have started earlier.
Maybe. That was before punk.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
That's a very, very interesting point. But let me tell you a story somebody told me on the tour, comparing rock and roll groups. They said the Beatles in America were the kind of kids so neatly clean, dapper, that you and the girls would have taken home for afternoon tea with their parents.
Yeah.
Okay? Lovely. What an image. The Rolling Stones, if you took the Stones home to your house, they would have burnt the house down. Yeah, you heard that.
This is my new boy, Mick. Dad, this is Mick.
Listen, don't knock Mick. Don't knock Mick.
No.
Mike, don't knock Mike. Yeah, okay. Because Mick has just had a new baby, isn't he, about 2 years ago?
Yeah.
So he's still going strong.
Have you met Mick Jagger?
No. Oh, yes, I met him when he did a press junket for a movie called, I think, Performance. He's done some movies, Mick. And, he knows how to handle himself. Very good sense of humor.
You can kind of see that he does. I can see the sense of humor in there.
During the tour, some things were, I guess people would throw things up on the stage, but one was jelly beans. And you mentioned that there's a different kind of jelly bean in England.
Right, the soft. Do you actually have soft jelly beans in the UK?
Yeah, well, you see, this is the problem. And this, and I'll tell you why it was a problem. We do have soft jelly beans in the UK. Yeah. And George made the blunder of his life when he said he liked jelly beans. So the next day, we're at Chicago or Cleveland, I can't remember, because it happened everywhere. And the girls and the fans started throwing jelly beans. Now, the American jelly bean, and if you check this with the American Jelly Bean Association, they will tell you that it's like it's like a little missile.
Yeah.
It's lead. It's like a bullet.
Yeah, I was going to say it's as hard as lead. Just about as heavy as lead. Yeah.
Yes.
So
lead.
So was that surprising?
I would show you, if I was in studio with you, I would show you the scars on the back of my neck because many of the girls that threw jelly beans were bad aimers. I mean, I was in the front row and I got hit. And I finally, I didn't go out and buy a coat of armor, but I tell you, I stang. Not stung, stang.
Yeah. So it was a surprise then. It really was. Like, what are these projectiles? What are these little wooden pellets that they're hurling at us when jelly beans are soft?
Yes. And that was it. And by the way, in Chicago, they, I know this sounds like a crazy story, but it's true. I was there. Mm-hmm. They threw a steak.
Yeah, I was going to. That was my next question.
It was not even barbecued. It was a raw steak.
What are you going to do with that?
It missed. It missed.
Yeah.
But who brings a steak to a concert?
Yeah, yeah. Like two girls talking.
It's not like they're selling steak in the lobby.
Yeah, it's like there's two girls talking, really looking forward to tonight. And I've got my, two pockets full of hard jelly beans. And you're bringing the raw steak. Good. Yeah, that's a great idea. That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, Gloria, you left the steak at home.
We got to go back.
Maybe one of them mentioned they love steak, raw steak.
That's it. Well, they did. They used to say, "What's your favorite food?" Ringo said, baked beans on toast. John said, I could do with a good steak. There's your answer.
Mm-hmm. Oh, is that where it comes from? Yeah. Now other, they brought other things.
And listen, I would stake my reputation on that.
I gotcha. Even more than foods, interesting to me, something of biblical proportions was actually bringing crippled children. Did they bring children to be healed or to touch or see the Beatles?
Look, they did. The kids in the wheelchairs, mm-hmm. and they used to call them crippled children.
Yes, that's why I said crippled. Yeah.
But PC society calls them not even handicapped children. There's mm-hmm. something
physically disabled.
Cleaner.
Physically disabled. Mm-hmm.
Physically disabled. Okay. Mm-hmm. And John was pissed off royally by that because John's weird sense of humor was, I'm not a healer. We mm-hmm. don't go and touch them and say walk, mm-hmm. And John made fun of that because that was his warped, very funny sense of humor.
And that's what I got out of the book. Reading the book, I probably learned more through you about John than about any other Beatle. That warped, dark and warped and bizarre humor that comes from John Lennon. That was new to me. Yeah, it would be. I don't know what I would think if the wheelchairs started coming up to the front row. Like, there's one thing of just allowing the person with a physical disability to get to the front to see the Beatles. Of course, you can't hear anything, but if it's actually for healing, like maybe the Beatles will bless my child. That's pretty.
Music is healing.
Yeah. If you can hear the music,
and their music was sort of happy music in the beginning.
Yeah, but I mean, look. I mean, I think I might have mentioned this in the book, Mike. If you remember, when we were in the hotel room and the curtains were drawn, And when John would open the curtains, hundreds of girls below would scream. So John thought that was pretty ridiculous. So he would march around the hotel room with his hands up with a Hitler salute. I mean, wow. Yeah, that's right.
Heil Lenin.
I mean, but that's, yeah, legend. I mean, it's true. I saw it, you know, but that was his way of showing how crazy this was.
Yeah.
And then at one point, you opened the curtains, you said. You mistakenly opened the curtains. Oh, okay.
Yeah, oh.
I thought maybe they thought you were
No. I mean, I want to tell you that I never looked like the Beatles. I never spoke like the Beatles. But I want to tell you, there were fringe benefits to being with the Beatles because many mothers of young girls were happy to, how can I put it delicately, offered rewards to people who could give an entree to the Beatles to their daughters. Let's leave it that way. I know this is a mature audience, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. It's one of the first rewards programs that they ever had, you know? Beatles rewards.
Like Best Western.
Yeah.
I think, sorry to interrupt, gentlemen, but, you know, we have been talking about all this raunchy stuff, and I think you're going to ask me for my brilliant knowledge of music, which is not brilliant. But I'm saying the tenor of this conversation, amusing as it is not heavy duty. It's not for the serious classical music people. Back to you.
Right.
Okay, so what kind of music are you into? I mean, do you collect vinyl? Do you listen to music?
Well, you know what I do now? I listen to classical music, on the classical music channel. But I do go out, when I go out to thrift stores and estate sales, I buy old vinyl for my collection. So that when I die, my kids will say, you filled the garage with all that crap, Dad, and now it's worth a lot of money.
Yeah. Right.
And I went out and bought some old Elvis vinyl.
Yeah, I started collecting a couple of years ago. I'm up to 200 records. Like this room we're in now.
Any good stuff?
Yeah, well, I like
any good stuff, Jim.
The reissues I buy a lot of, and the color vinyl. So eventually, maybe they'll become worth something. Or my son, I get a hold of them and just give them away. Who knows?
Yeah.
He might not know what they're worth, but.
Now, speaking of music, one thing that we did note was that a lot that's very different from any other show anywhere is that these shows were actually 20 to 30 minutes long. That's something else I learned from your book. I had no idea that they weren't playing for an hour and a half. So it literally was very quick.
Oh, I mean, it was a joke. It was a running joke with the Beatles. Let's see if we can break our world record. Let's see if we can get it down to under 26 minutes.
Wow.
I'm serious. That was the joke.
Yeah.
Well, most of their songs were only a couple minutes long.
Yeah, 2.5, 3 minutes.
They only had, I think, 4 albums out at the time.
Yeah.
Although they were doing cover songs too, like when they played the Cavern Club. But I figured they only did about 7 songs. I mean, think about when Led Zeppelin toured America, they weren't doing 20-minute shows.
Yeah.
You know, they had to be doing an hour and a half at least.
Yeah. It was a different kind of playing. Let's jump ahead.
All right, let me ask you guys. Can I ask you guys a question?
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Okay, that's a good point. So I go and see Paul McCartney before coronavirus to San Diego, and I go backstage to talk to him before the show. Interestingly enough, he wants to get out of the stadium once he's finished. And I say, Paul, you know, back in the old days, you used to do, if we were lucky, 30-minute shows. I said, do you play longer now? He said, you wait and see. So my question for you is, how long does Paul play in his current incarnation on stage?
I'm going to guess 2.25.
I'm going to say 45 minutes.
Okay, you're both absolutely wrong. 3 hours and 17 minutes.
Wow, I was off by an hour.
Seriously.
Wow. Yeah.
Unbelievable. He never leaves the stage, you know? He never leaves the stage.
Yeah.
Mind you, we got 10 minutes of fireworks.
Yeah, let's jump from music to actually we were interested in being what you want to say about being the ghostwriter for George Harrison during that time. You go into detail explaining that, and getting to know George was difficult at first, but then what do you bring from that experience, especially at that time in your life?
Well, here's what I bring. First of all, my newspaper was paying George for the column. Okay. Now, I was writing the bloody column, You think they paid me any more money? No. So the point of the column was to talk to George and say, hey, George, what was it like for you in New Orleans? But George went to bed at 2 a.m. and woke up at lunchtime. My deadline was long gone. So I had to make up the column. So after 2 weeks, George confronted me. He'd spoken to his mother, and she said, George, it's a boring column. What's going on? And George said to me on the plane, your column you're writing for me is a bunch of, he actually said shite, if I can use that expression.
Yeah, you can say it.
Especially in the U.S., you can say shite.
You can say shite. Okay. Well, he said it was a bunch of shite, and it was a bunch. It was a pile, actually. But I said I couldn't go crazy and make stuff up, so I just went along with a boring claptrap. Hey, it's great to be in New Orleans, where rhythm and blues reigns supreme.
Blah, blah, blah.
Big bloody deal, right? Anyway, so I said, George, talk to me, and tell me what's going on in your mind, and I'll do a better job. And he did, and we got on much better after that.
Yeah, communication, definitely.
Were you writing? You said you were writing a column to begin with. Did this take the place of that column? Like, what was your job as far as reporting on the Beatles themselves?
My job was to cover the Beatles in each city, whatever happened to them, what they said, what happened. And then in addition, the column was an additional thing for me to write. So I was a reporter reporting on a riot in, when I think it was in New Orleans again, where cops on horseback galloped through the field and nearly trampled the fans to death because they were invading the stage. And then on the Hollywood Bowl, would you believe they had an artificial fountain in front of the stage, and a lot of girls, fully clothed, dived in the fountain to swim to the stage. You tell me, you guys are electronic experts, I'm sure. If I was a sogging wet girl and I managed to swim to the stage and I hugged John, what would have happened?
You would have gotten electrocuted.
Explosive.
Yeah. And the girls aren't thinking about that. That's for sure. Wow. No one expected them to jump in. Really, no one expected them to jump in the water, get soaked, fully clothed, or not, and get up to the stage.
Yeah. It's strange.
So in the book, we want to talk about Jayne Mansfield. The Beatles were renting a house, and Jayne Mansfield came knocking on the door one day. Did you open the door for Jayne?
No, I didn't open the door.
Okay.
But I understand when John opened the door, how can we put it? Jayne Mansfield was a voluptuous, how about that word?
Yes.
If I can use it in this era. Yeah, okay. So it was a very voluptuous lady. And I probably, because I'm not very tall, would have been confronted with her voluptuarity.
She would have knocked you over.
Anyway.
For our listeners, Ivor has his hands up and has his hands up around each side of his head there. Two hands up. I like voluptuous. We're gonna, that's not gorgeous is the one, of course, that's used all the time. But voluptuous is really going to be describing her better, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Was this the next night they went to the Whiskey A Go-Go?
So what happened was that she was, if she's no longer with us, of course, she was a publicity hussy. she did anything she could to get PR. And it worked well because she wanted to be the next Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah.
And for those of your listeners who weren't around, Marilyn Monroe, just a background, was a voluptuous actress, a very good actress, and was a sex symbol of an era. Anyway, I shall continue. So he wanted to have a picture taken when she knocked at the door. I'm going to make a joke again, but I won't. I'll just carry on with knocking at the door. And then the Beatles opened the door, and Brian was there, and Brian said, "No, no pictures, please. The boys are tired or something." But Jayne she wasn't going to be put off. So Jayne called John and said, "I'm going to see Johnny Rivers tomorrow night. Be my guest, you and the boys." And they went to the Whiskey A Go-Go the next night. Paul didn't go because Paul was off having a quiet dinner with another actress called Peggy Lipton, who he was dating at the time. She was dating him. So we all show up at the Whiskey A Go-Go. It's supposed to be a private visit. And we arrive, and there are photographers there. We squeeze in. The Beatles go in a big booth, and I'm sitting on the table, sitting them with Jayne in the middle, with John, and John kind of making, how shall I say, getting friendly with Jayne. And George was getting drunk, and I was sitting there watching. It was like watching theater, seriously. I was on a lower table, 10 feet away. George was getting upset at a photographer from the local Herald Examiner newspaper, who had, in those days, they had cameras, not the little mini cameras. They had cameras as big as a refrigerator, seriously, with a flash bulb. Flash bulb.
Bright flashes. Every time you get a picture, bright flash.
Right, exactly. Thank you. Yeah, you're right. So George was getting really PO'd, and he said to the guy, "Would you please leave us alone?" Well, he actually didn't quite say that. He said it in stronger terms. I mean, you just imagine what John what George with a few drinks would have said. Well, he did say it the way you think he said it.
Yeah. No, I just said it just rhymes with duck, or yeah.
Oh yes, that's exactly. Yeah.
In the book, it's folk in the book. Yeah.
So that's all right. We don't know, by hook or by foot,
Foot.
So where were we? So John was kind of canoodling with Jayne, and George was getting angrier and angrier and more oiled with the drinks. He finally picked up his drink and he threw it at the photographer, who would not leave them alone. But George had never had any throwing drinks at the photographer's practice. And he was way off key. And the drink went to the next booth, where Mamie Van Doren, another voluptuous actress of the era, was with friends, and she got a bar of gin and tonic and whatever. She jumped up, she screamed, everybody screamed. The Beatles realized that Bedlam was worse, and they all jumped up. They were lifted out over the booth by the security guards, and they made their getaway in the back of the Whiskey to the waiting limo. Bad experience. What made it even worse was the next morning, as we left LA, I saw George looking at the local Herald Examiner with a picture of him throwing a drink over the photographer. Big 8-column picture. So that was their encounter with the fabulous Jayne Mansfield, which was memorable but never led to.
It didn't really turn out as they expected it to as a PR event. Loving the stories here. Loving the stories.
We go on to Elvis. Now, this wasn't the first time you met Elvis. You interviewed Elvis on the set of a movie in 1963. And do you remember what movie that was he was filming?
Well, let me just tell you. I don't remember, Jim, what the movie was, but I'll tell you this. They were all the same. They had the same.
That is true.
It was a trick question.
Lady. Yeah, it was a trick question. I'm glad it was a trick.
Because they're all the same.
Yeah, all I know, it wasn't Elvis Goes to Hawaii, because there was no leis or any of those flowers around. So it was one of the movies, one of the 32 movies he made over a period of about 45 years. 32 movies over 45 years Elvis made. And as I say, same plot line. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets the girl. 6 new songs for the...
And usually a fight.
A fight too, yeah.
Yeah, there's usually a fight. It's like a bar fight. Yeah.
I forgot the fight. Yeah, you're right. Anyway, so where were we?
Elvis, meeting Elvis.
Elvis.
So when Elvis met the Beatles, well, first of all, do you think Elvis was a little jealous of the Beatles, I think, because Elvis was the biggest selling artist of the 1950s and into the 60s, but here come this band, the Beatles, taking away his glory, taking away his spotlight.
Yes.
So to say.
Well, that was all. You see, Jim, that is the underpinnings of the story. I didn't realize it when I went with them to meet Elvis, that was the reason why Elvis was jealous. Anyway, John loved Elvis. John loved Heartbreak Hotel. He loved Blue Suede Shoes. He told me he used to listen, like I did in England growing up, to all those songs of Elvis on a portable radio late at night, because we listened on a channel called Radio Luxembourg, which was in Europe, because the BBC did not have rock and roll music on their channels.
But Luxembourg did.
So they wanted to meet Elvis. It finally happened. The first year, they were all too busy. Elvis was making these crappy movies. The Beatles were on tour. And finally, they came along, and it was kind of weird. We show up. Brian Epstein said, no reporters. I managed to get in because I was, I don't know, one of the family. No tape recorders and no photographers.
Yeah.
There's not a single picture of that, except John arriving in the you might find a picture of John arriving, as we all did, in the courtyard of Elvis's house. So we go in there, and I stand back, and the Beatles sit down. Nobody introduces the Beatles to Elvis. So we're sitting around, and Elvis is watching a giant 16-inch color TV. 16 inches was very big then.
Yeah, at that time.
But what was even more stunning, a bit wider than that. Much wider.
That's 16 inches, Not 72, people. Yeah.
Not 72. But the interesting thing was, for 10 minutes, we all sat watching Elvis, watching the giant screen. Nobody introduced them to each other. And what the Beatles were fascinated about was Elvis had this thing in his hand, and every time he pressed it, the picture changed. You know, do you remember what that was called?
My dad called it a
Remember
clicker.
that?
Clicker.
My dad called it a clicker.
That's right. Well, there you go, Jim. Your dad was right. Elvis had this clicker, and when you clicked it, the picture changed. Oh, my God. Seriously, I mean, you've got to realize this is 1965.
Well, that was high technology at that
time.
I
remember when the remote, I think we called it a clicker. I remember when the remote came to us. Yeah. Black and white TV too. So this was color TV. Yeah, wow. Really? Okay. Yeah. Elvis was ahead of time with the technology, because money breeds technology. I remember having the black and white TV. Yeah. So it would have been good. You would have enjoyed getting up and breaking that awkward silence and introducing the Beatles to Elvis. I mean, you certainly would have done a great job of that.
Yeah, I would have done a great job, but I knew that I wasn't supposed to be there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And unless I said, I'm what am I going to say? I'm their minder, I'm their bodyguard, all 5'3" and 7, 5'2" and a quarter. Never mind. Anyway, so what am I going to say? So I kept my mouth shut and just watched this charade playing out. And then finally Elvis, and I got to say, he had a sense of humor, jumps up and says something like, if you guys didn't come here to jam, I'm going to bed. Well, that broke the ice. And they got up and they started jamming.
Yeah.
And poor old Ringo was left out. There were no drums. They plugged in the guitars. Ringo went to play snooker or pool in the other room. And for about 20 minutes, they jammed. all Elvis music, none of the Beatles songs.
Wow.
Yeah.
Letting him lead then, really. Essentially, he was leading. Yeah, it was his house. Got it.
You were kind of like the fifth Beatle if you could have played an instrument.
Yeah.
You know,
you're in.
like if you could have played the tambourine, that they might have.
Well, tambourine. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because it's not that difficult. I think you just bang it at the right moment. Is that right?
Yeah.
I'll keep the beat.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Did you
Can
ever
I call in next week for the next lesson?
Did you ever see them rehearse songs, or I'm sure there were rehearsals, and then you could hear the music?
I want to tell you.
Yeah.
Jim, there were no rehearsals because they did exactly the same set every single concert except in Kansas City when they suddenly got a late gig to play Kansas City, got a lot of money, and they opened with Kansas City, the song.
Yeah.
And otherwise it was cookie cutter. It was exactly the same every show. And they never spoke in the middle. They may have said, and now the song from our latest, John would say, and now we're going to give you a song from our latest movie, A Hard Day's Night. Yeah. That was it. And when they finished, they were gone with the wind.
Mm-hmm. That's what Kiss does now. I mean, some bands still do that. Kiss, when they were before the coronavirus, I saw them, and supposedly they play the same songs every night, but they've got the fire and all. They've got a lot of stuff going on, so they have to sync it up with everything.
Well, the other thing I'm going to ask you a question again is you can imagine with 50,000 kids or people in the audience, as soon as they finished Long Tall Sally, they were gone. Mm-hmm. They were in the back out of the door.
Yeah.
Either in the limo or the ambulance or the fire truck or the meat truck, because it was dangerous to hang around, and they were gone before everybody stood up.
Mm-hmm. Right,
out of the stadium.
And it's important to note for our listeners who just think that's the norm. This was different at that point, right? To play quick, take off, be gone, right?
Yeah. Now, I mean, where does the phrase "Elvis has left the building" come from? Was that to do with getting a fast getaway?
Right.
Yeah. Before the people, they turn the lights on, and he's already
Elvis has left
in the
building.
car.
Yeah.
That's right. There you go.
So now you in 1966 the Beatles came back to America for their second tour, but this was a little different because you were only you only covered the West Coast shows. Like how many shows did you attend? But this was different because you weren't. Were you staying in the hotels at this time with them, or just covering?
1964 was the first tour.
Yeah.
I covered from start to finish.
Yeah.
1965, when they went to see Elvis, I covered the West Coast, and in 1966, their last tour of America, when people were burning the Beatles records in '66.
Yeah.
The reason that John said we're more popular than Jesus. I mean, that turned America, certain elements of America off. So 66, I saw them at their parties in Beverly Hills, at the Hollywood Bowl, and maybe I think, that was about down to San Diego.
That was the last concert.
So I think that could have been the beginning of the huge movement, especially by religious conservatives, to hate rock and roll for the coming 2 decades or so. It was pretty big. That could have been actually the beginning of it, with John saying that. That's very interesting, and for it to be so such a backlash with burning records and all that.
Well, parents didn't like Elvis either.
That's true.
Shaking his pelvis.
Elvis's pelvis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Remember they said, didn't they say Elvis was to be photographed from the waist up?
Yeah.
And not, you weren't supposed to see his hips swiveling.
Yeah.
There was a firecracker incident. There was where there was a sounded like it could have been a small caliber gun. Do you recall that?
Yeah, well, what happened was, and I can't remember, I think it was in the South, but what happened was John was persona non grata in 1966. John was the one who made that sacrilegious statement, which of course was blown up beyond all proportions. And so John was very nervous and John was very apologetic. And John realized the mood in America had changed dramatically to Beatles because of that one statement. And he was seeing that they were burning his records, Beatle records, having big bonfires. And the mood was a bit ugly in the Deep South. And on that occasion, John was in, I forget which, maybe Birmingham, somewhere in the South. There was a firecracker that went off, and I wasn't in the stadium at the time, but one of, I forget who it was, Mal Evans, the roadie, said, we were terrified. We thought we would see John crumple to the ground, having been shot. And we knew it was time to get out of town fast.
And you didn't actually know, because that could have been a gun that was shot like a 22 and that cracks like a firecracker and missed. I mean, you really don't know, correct? So John...
Well, no, nobody really knew. Nobody said, nobody did a deep investigation and said, well, there was little Luann, Birmingham, Alabama, who bought a firecracker and let it off. We never know to this day.
Right. But John was disturbed by America's love of guns. Is that true? He was aware. Is that right?
John was really, I mean, with all due respect to Paul and the others, John was the most socially conscious of the Beatles. Right. John was the one that showed me in 1964 a newspaper somewhere in Florida with a picture of police and their attack dogs attacking protesters when the black-white revolution or whatever, the whole protest movement was on. John saw that, was disgusted by it, and that's when the whole stuff came out about would they play to a segregated audience. But to be honest with you guys, I never saw many black people in the audience. It was mostly whites that went to see the Beatles. So, but anyway, John had the conscience. John said, and Paul said, we will not play to a segregated audience. And that was it. But I may add, that 66 concert was the start of the end. John said, we're a bunch of performing fleas. They don't come to hear us, they come to see us. And I don't want that. And 66, they stopped. Never to tour again.
Yeah, that's a really important point that you make there. Back about race, I think that there's two reasons I'm thinking that there wasn't many black people, African Americans at the shows. One is, it might be the style of music, but also even up until a few years ago, people who are minority are not going to go into chaos and crowds. I mean, this is a huge cops, chaos and crowds. I mean, so it would make sense that you wouldn't, you'd be seeing mostly white people there. Yeah. Very interesting.
I mean, I went to San Diego Petco Stadium 2019, 6 months before the Corona, to see Paul McCartney, 50,000 people at the stadium. There were, more assorted audiences, but it's still majorly white for a Paul McCartney concert. Yeah, I mean, so maybe Paul would come up and say, "No, don't." We get a lot of black people, we get a lot of Asians, we get a lot of Hispanics. I don't know. If you call up Paul, ask him and see what he thinks. But seriously,
what's interesting is I just heard an interview with Tom Jones. He was on Mark Maron podcast, but this was a couple of days ago, and Tom Jones claims that the Beatles were the ones that segregated music because before the Beatles, everybody was listening to Elvis and Motown. And
I think that would have been unintentional with the style of the music and probably not intentional. But what do you think, Ivor?
Well, I think, nobody has ever brought that subject up. And I think it's a fascinating topic for discussion. And I'll just give you my feeling. I mean, Tom Jones said that, and it's a very interesting subject. Did they say? I don't know, and I'd love to look at it more closely because everything about the Beatles has been examined 9 million times.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But good point. All I want to tell you, I mean, this is not answering your question, but I had to, as part of my job, go and see Tom Jones every bloody time he performed in Las Vegas.
We saw him twice, not in Vegas, though, but still an incredible show.
So tell us about Tom Jones in Vegas.
An incredible show, but it's improved. If you next time get Tom on. But when I saw Tom, he did the same bloody show, same as the Beatles. He got the same women to sit in the front row, gave them the underwear, gave them the keys, and said, when I sing, it's most unusual, start throwing. I mean, he didn't. Gordon Mills, his manager, did. But I thought, if I have to go and see another Tom Jones show in Vegas, kill me.
No, we saw him, and his voice was strong, and the second half of the show, it was just him and a guitar player. Tom sat on a stool, just him and a guitar player, and his voice. I'm talking like 10, 15 years ago.
Did you or your wife throw any underwear? Did you throw any clothes at all? Did you throw your hat at least?
I ripped off my shirt and threw it on stage.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting because, you know, Tom, when Tom used to hang out with Elvis in at the Hilton Hotel in Vegas a lot. That's where I used to go to the Hilton Hotel for Tom's show. And then Tom didn't play the Hilton. Elvis played the Hilton, of course. 800 performances Elvis played at the Hilton Hotel, would you believe? Anyway.
You know, one of the things you write is that what the Beatles did, you know, on tour. We're not going to go back into that too much, but I just saw something I missed. Booze and all-night games of Monopoly. Now, I grew up playing Monopoly, and I didn't see that coming. I was thinking maybe all kinds of booze, which was definitely there, and then maybe some, you know, poker or other card games. But Monopoly, I mean, really?
Yeah, let me just say, the Beatles actually didn't drink that much. I mean, I know this sounds silly. They didn't drink that much because every week or two, Brian would get the Beatles and say, hey, your bar charges have gone to over $100 this week. Can you cut back, you know, your mini bar charges? So Brian stayed on that. When I must confess that I had a next room to John, in a smaller room, of course. I didn't have a mini bar. So I would go in and steal a drink from the bar because the Beatles.
So you were the one running up the tab.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, but keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is that John would call me and then call Arthur Schreiber, who was a Westinghouse guy, and say, come and play Monopoly. And he loved Monopoly. And we would go in at 2 a.m. We'd start playing Monopoly. John would start cheating. And then when we accused him of cheating, which we didn't, he would then say, hang on a minute. He'd pick up the phone and call Cynthia in Liverpool, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning is 11 o'clock in the morning in Liverpool. And then we'd see this rock and roll guy goo-gooing to Julian, you know, who was a baby. And then he'd put the phone down and carry on cheating in Monopoly.
Cheating in Monopoly. Was there a different, is it the same classic U.S. Monopoly game? Just, I mean, there's a lot of lovers of Monopoly, I know out there with our listeners. Was it different? Was it the same classic?
The difference in the game, I mean, it was the same principle. Just exactly the same principle. Right? But don't forget, the English board games had, instead of what's the expensive New York property?
Park Place, Boardwalk.
Yeah, okay. They would have Mayfair or Park Lane.
Okay.
They would change the station, Fenchurch Street instead of Grand Central or whatever the hell. So they had an English board game which was applicable to English places, properties, to the Americans, to the American game. But it was the same principle. The idea is you roll the dice, you land on your property and you buy it. If John wanted to land on a certain property and didn't, he would say, I want to roll again. And we didn't argue. And then he'd roll again, and finally he'd get the number he wanted. He'd land on it and he'd buy it. He was a property mogul at heart.
I just imagine him a little more fair than that. Just thinking just thinking back to all the different people on not just the first tour, but just all the relationship with the Beatles as we're focusing on that today. Was there others that you got close to? I'm thinking maybe of Derek Taylor or somebody else that you as we say now, you were chilling with. People, you kick back and you got an extra hour chilling with.
The answer is Derek and I were very close because Derek used to work on my newspaper. He was a showbiz writer. Or Brian, he went to work for Brian. So it was his paper. He was the one that introduced me to the Beatles. He was the one with my passport to them. And he was a great guy. He just knew his stuff. He adored the Beatles. He had the same sense of humor. He could have been a Beatle himself, a great guy. And Derek was the one. When Derek argued with Brian Epstein, very often he did, finally he left him. He came to California where I live. We got back together again, became friends, went to parties. He came to my wedding. So I knew, because Derek came to America, and the Beach Boys and the Byrds and all these groups of the era would hire Derek and say, sprinkle some of your Beatle magic on us. And Derek was great at it. It was terrific. He knew his stuff. Great guy. And the roadies were nice. Mal Evans was always the big hunk. Neil Aspinall was a little less of a hunk, more of a thinking man. And as you know, I'm sure, that Neil went on to become the head of Apple in London, ran the company. And Mal had problems with drugs and came to America, to LA, and was shot dead by a sheriff who had been called to his house. I'm sure you know the story. I mean, the sheriff thought he was armed. His girlfriend, Mal's girlfriend, said he was armed. And Mal Evans, who was a great guy and a real confidant of the Beatles, was shot dead by one of the sheriffs. And that was it. Neil lived a long life, died a few years ago, and as I said, ended up running Apple, the Apple Beatles company.
Yeah, successful.
I think I read in your book, if I'm correct, that, or maybe it was someone else, but you have 300 Beatles books in your collection?
I've got more. I keep buying.
I didn't know there were that many.
Ridiculous. There are. And I just bought, I met on a convention, virtual convention, a guy called Leslie Cavendish, who was a Beatles hairdresser, and he wrote a book. So he sent me his book. And then there's so much stuff. There's a great book by Craig about 150 things you need to know about the Beatles. Every month, it seems, there's a new Beatle book. I'm sure you guys know, but anyway, yes.
Yeah. Have you read them all?
I've read a lot of them. I've read the ones where I want to get information about, for example, about the Beatle finances I was interested in because I saw what a mess it was in America. And I looked up books on their finances. I must admit that you guys are the musicologists. If you were to say to me, well, what song is on what album? I can't tell you. I know every Sgt. Pepper album. I know songs, and I know the White Album because the White Album was supposedly used by Manson to promote the murders in the Manson murders. Anyway.
That's right. That's right.
That's another story.
Right. So today, Ivor, we're focusing, you've given us so much of your time. We're focusing on the Beatles. And there's going to be a lot of people, a lot of Beatles fans looking and hearing from you. And I want our listeners to know that we don't have the time to go into all the other things that you've done. But we can just mention that you, as you mentioned, Charles Manson was using or relating to Helter Skelter, I suppose, and some other things. But you've studied that. That's been an area of your reporting and studying.
Yeah, you had a book that came out before the trial, and they used it as a blueprint for the trial, Manson murders.
Yeah, they did, yeah. But that's a whole new ball game.
Yeah, it is. And that came, was that early 70s? Excuse my ignorance of history.
That was in 1970, before the trial began, before the Manson murder trial began.
Yeah.
Written a new book a year or two ago, yeah. My new book came out 2 years ago. It's called Manson Exposed, a reporter's 50-year journey into madness and murder. And if I can just say, if anybody's interested in the Beatle book or the Manson book or my children's book about 4 penguins who want to be like the Beatles, they can go to www.ivordavisbooks.com. And that's the end of my promotion. End of my commercial.
Now, you're on Facebook? Do you do Instagram at all?
Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on, who knows? I mean, listen, I'm an old guy, and every time they come out with Zoom, Gloom, Doom, TikTok, bang, bang, hub, hub.
Well,
you know, it's too much. My grandkids can help me.
Yeah.
Help. I need somebody.
Help. I need somebody. Help.
Now, I got your book on Amazon, so people can go there, correct, and get your books, or like you said, your website. Yes. So we had a great time, Ivor, and
well, thank you very much.
So thank you, Ivor.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, you know, we covered a lot, but we didn't cover a lot. There's always a lot. You know, you've got to try and cover 80 years in an hour is difficult.
Yeah.
But I've had good fun with you guys.
Thank you.
Except for the 2-second delay when I keep thinking I'm treading on your toes, but I'm not. So I apologize. We'll talk again whenever it suits you. And thanks for having me on the show.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
you.
Sure.
Have a great rest of the day, Ivor. Take care.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Today's interview was recorded on Zoom and at Did You Say
7
Studios in Washington, New Jersey. Go to the YouTube channel for exclusive video content. Intro and exit music by the band 99%. Today's show was produced and edited by Jim Thatcher. You can find Jim and Mike Talk Music on Apple Music, Spotify, Podbean, or wherever you listen to podcasts.